Good evening. Sorry, caught me on the hop, literally. Sorry I'm a couple of minutes kicking off. A couple of minutes late kicking off, but I'm here. Unlike last week when traffic and life got in the way. So I'm really sorry about last week, but we're here today. Going to talk about Subarus, or are you going to ask about Subarus? Anything relating to Subarus, be it modifications, self-tuning, ECUs, fault finding, what works, what doesn't work, what point things break, anything Subaru related. Pop your question in the comments, in the live stream comments. Put a Q at the beginning of it, that way I can see that it's a question, and I'll do my very best to answer it. So yeah, this session is for you. It's about you. It's not about me. I'm not promoting anything, or not got a pre-written agenda of what I want to go through. So if you got any questions, pop them in, and yeah, I'll do my very best. I can see I've got a couple of questions already. Hi guys. Hi Colin. Hi Mark. Hi Mel. Hi Dav. Right. Yeah, you've got two questions, fueling related. Okay, I'll wait for those. Good evening, Zed. Hi, mate. Right, I've got my glasses on tonight so that I can see what's written on the screen in front of me. They're not steaming up, which tells you that it's a bit colder here now. Even though I have got, polo shirt on, because it does get a bit warm in the office. So, yeah, mention about me coming up to Scotland. Is it something that might happen next year? Yes, if there's enough demand, yeah, I'll spend a day or two up there, not a problem at all. Love Scotland. It's just a very long drive for me, so not a problem to do that, but it just kind of needs to be worthwhile, really. Right. Right. Dav, right, first question from Dav. Right, how do I tell if my tuners are running rich? The easy and most reliable way to test that is fit a wideband sensor. The standard narrowband sensor on the Subaru will only read down to sort of 11.14, 11.25, depending on the ECU. So if it's much richer than that, it's not gonna tell you anything other than 11.25. So a wideband will read down to like 9 to 1. At 9 to 1, it's going to be stuttering and misfiring. At 10 to 1, it might stutter a little bit. 10.5, you're not really going to tell the difference from a how it drives point of view, but you will be losing a bit of power and obviously wasting fuel. So a wideband will tell you that, but it depends what it's been mapped to and who's mapped it. Generally, when I'm mapping a Subaru, it's going to be 11.3, 11.4 to 1 from a AFR point of view on boost. If you're running normal sort of pump fuel, if you're running methanol and more exotic fuels, then it'll be slightly leaner. But yeah, wideband is the only real way to tell you whether it's running rich, whether it's running right, or whether it's running lean. Do I have any widebands that I recommend? I use the Innovate LM2, but that's only because that's portable. They do, I think it's called an XC16, which is a little 52mm gauge that you can fit in the car. It comes with a Bosch sensor. The Bosch sensors aren't the most reliable in the world. There's particularly a bad batch of those, I think, going around at the moment, where they're kind of not lasting very long. But most aftermarket wideband kits use the Bosch LSU 4.9 sensor, and they're good. They're accurate, or as accurate as they're ever going to be. There are slight discrepancies between different widebands, but as long as it's kind of in that region of 11.3, 11.4, something around that, then it's going to soak up the differences between them. AEM do a nice one, which you can also take an output from that and put that into either your laptop for data logging or into a spare sensor input on the ECU. A lot of guys wire that into the rear O2 sensor or a TGV sensor and actually recalibrate the settings within the data logging software to actually show an AFR rather than the voltage. There's lots of options on that, but most of the aftermarket wideband, if it is a proper wideband, will use a Bosch LSU 4.9. Right. 2.5 engine, 150,000 miles. What important jobs should be done on the engine at this point to keep doing even more miles? Thanks very much for the Q&A. It's extremely helpful. Obviously, like cam belt, I had a question the other day. Someone saying that the on the later cars they don't put a time thing on the cam belt change. That was just on mileage, but they do very few miles a year, and therefore do they need to change it sort of at 5 years or 7 years, or based on the actual mileage? I would always do it on the time thing, and I think 5 years is a good time to change it. If you're doing low mileage, then there's a good chance that the cam belt's actually getting more brittle and more fragile with age. It's like an elastic band, not really, but it's it needs movement before to stop the rubber perishing. So make sure the cam belt's up to date. Beyond that, there's not really an awful lot. It's good oil, good fuel, and I've mapped Subarus with 300,000 miles on, and they've been absolutely perfect. They don't lose power like some engines over the years. If it was 220 out of the factory, 10 years later, it's still going to be 220 or thereabouts. So just keep it up, the maintenance, making sure the plugs are sort of changed regularly. Don't need to do it too often with the spark plugs. Subarus don't sort of get through spark plugs really. Cam belt, make sure that the oil's good and clean, and oil filter sort of changes. But with normal maintenance, they'll go on for absolutely ever. Right. Right, hi Andy. Head gasket failure in a JDM Hawkeye WRX STI with 100,000 kilometres. How likely? I would say very unlikely, but it depends whether it's been mapped for UK fuel. If it's still running on the JDM map, then there is a very, very good chance that it's detonating on that map, because the Japanese fuel is that much better quality than the UK or US or any other domestic market in Europe. So it could be detonating, which is, increased cylinder pressure, unnecessary increases in cylinder pressure, and that can sort of nibble away at the head gasket. So if it's been mapped for UK fuel and you're up to date with maintenance and making sure it's not running low on coolant, then I think it's really unlikely. They're a very strong engine on those. It's a beautiful car. So yeah, the engines will take 450, 500 horsepower as standard. So I'm a bit wheezy today. I've been in the dyno all week, and by the end of the week, It's I can really feel it on my chest. So I sound really old. I am really old, but right. Cameron, hi Cameron. 2002 Forester won't start when it's snowing and cold. It cranks, just no start during snowy cold weather, but starts just fine and warm. What would cause this? It could be cranking voltage or ampage on the battery. It could be fuel pressure. That's quite an often a common thing. If the fuel pressure regulator or the fuel pump is getting a little bit weak, then it hasn't got enough for that initial start. Or it could be something within the map that's just not really set up for the extremes of cold. Has it been mapped, Cameron? If it has, it might just be that you need to put some extra sort of startup enrichment in there to actually get it to sort of clear its throat and actually get started. Right, so I'll come back to that question. And I'll come back to that question. Right, hi David. Got a Cyvex S6, I presume you mean, for my version 4 Type R. In your opinion, is it worth converting to drive-by-wire or stick with cable? Drive-by-wire has got its advantages. Not everyone likes it from a pedal feel point of view, but you can actually do anti-lag an awful lot better with a drive-by-wire than with a cable throttle. You can do all kinds of shaping of the throttle curve, which you can't do with a cable. But with an S6, you're not going to be able to control drive-by-wire on that. You're going to need an S7 Plus, which is probably about double the money, unfortunately. The S6 hasn't got the drive-by-wire drivers for it. So it's an awful lot of work to wire one in and to get one in, and cost-wise, in my opinion, probably not a massive advantage. It's certainly an awful lot of extra inputs because you've got 2 throttle sensors, 2 pedal position sensors, and the drive-by-wire outputs as well. So it's not quite as straightforward as you think it would be. Obviously, the manifold as well is going to you're going to struggle to get the drive-by-wire throttle to fit onto the manifold because the bolt spacing is different. Da-da-da. Right, hi Owen. In Uddersfield, just bought my classic Impreza to a Mappa, I presume not me, after over 12 years of okay, I'm not sure what you're meaning there. Turbo, Garrett Turbo, Cyvex S6, 750 injectors, 2.5 motor. You say any idea what it could be? I don't know what the question is. I don't know whether I've missed the question. No, I can't see a question. Can you ask the question again, Owen, and I'll answer it. Promise. Right, Sem Matimba. Insights into tip-in fueling. Do you mean in a general expression or how to tune it? In a general expression, when you put your foot on the throttle, the change in the throttle position or the accelerator position will dictate how much extra fuel is needed, and it needs extra fuel for that initial spurt. If the throttle position sensor isn't set up right, or if it's not calibrated right, then you won't get enough tip in, and it will kind of cough and splutter. If you get too much tip in, then you will get a big rich plume of black smoke out the back until it sort of settles down and clears its throat. If you've got a pretty standard set of injectors, pretty standard setup, then generally speaking you almost never need to change that. It's probably 10% of cars that I map that I need to change that in some way. Generally it's only small changes if it's on standard injectors. If you go in much bigger aftermarket injectors, then obviously those values that are in the map are set for the smaller standard injectors and would need to be sort of altered. But the manufacturers of the injectors generally give you data or values to put into software to actually give you those values. But if you're tuning it on the dyno, it's a lot easier to see what's going on. You'd hold it at a steady state and sort of add more throttle, and it should go marginally richer at that point rather than leaner, in which case you need to add more tip in, or like mega rich, in which case you need to ease back on the tip in. Hope that helps. Bum, bum, bum. Right. Okay. The watt tables should be adjusted for fueling. Specifically, the ECU was tuned for Japan's higher octane fuel, but only 91 is available there. Okay, but your 91 is the equivalent to about 97 in the UK, and about the same in Japan. So 97, they run about 101, I believe. So it's not that much difference, but there is a difference. It's generally not fueling that you would need to be changing at that point. You obviously need to make sure that it is fueling right from an air fuel point of view, but it's ignition timing that is going to be the thing that you really need to change. You need to reduce that because the higher octane fuel in Japan will be more resistant to detonation. So those values in the base ignition timing table or the knock advance table need to come down. You probably 3, maybe 4 degrees of ignition timing down from Japan level fuel down to 91 octane. But that's just a guess off the top of my head. I would start at 4 and see, using deck cans, make sure it's not detting. Make a set of deck cans. I did a video on it, really easy, really cheap, and it gives you every bit of information you need. Don't rely on the ECU to tell you whether it's detonating, because it doesn't always hear. In fact, most times it doesn't. I know a lot of people, a lot of tuners in the States rely on the ECU, rely on the knock control on the ECU. It's foolish, really, really foolish in my opinion. I'll argue with every single one of them, because from 20 years of mapping Subarus, the amount of times I've heard that and the ECU hasn't is more than it should be. Okay, another question. Grinding noise ever so often when starting the car, usually when cold. Same noise when you turn the key and hold it to. Yeah, it's probably just a sticky starter motor. Either replace it or get it serviced. It's just the I can't remember off the top of my head what it's called, but the solenoid in there is just not coming back quick enough. Dum-dum. Right, okay, so car's only doing 282 horsepower, It could be restricted from the exhaust. Right, restricted, it's 3-inch exhaust. Yeah, that's not going to restrict it. So, what's the turbo on that, Owen? But that should be a shitload more power than that. Yeah, if that's a Garrett turbo, then you know you're definitely 100 horsepower down on where it should be, I would have thought, if not more than that. If it's on Cyvex, I presume you've got data logs for what it's doing. If you want someone to look over the map, then happy to do that. But there may be issues like, you know, is it holding good boost but just not making power, or is the boost down as well? Depends on how it's set up and who's mapped it, and whether they're, you know, a Subaru mapper or someone that's just mapped it, because, you know, Subarus are different to every other car. But yeah, it sounds like it's way down on power. Never been mapped fully stock besides the EJ20. Should it have been mapped? No, I think the standard ECU would control that fine, but it could be that it's just there's a coolant, an additional amount of fuel that it needs for cold start that isn't there in the map on that car. It might be worth like getting hold of ROM Radar or ECU Flash, downloading the ROM and seeing whether you can add some extra fuel into the startup. Right, what boost ranges are safe for a TD05 20G turbo running bug-eye SCI intercooler? Something like that. You're probably talking about 1.5 bar of boost, like 21 psi, would be fine as far as not overheating the intercooler too much. You should be able to tune for that with whatever fuel that you're running in your area, your region. So yeah, about 1.5 bar is probably where I would be tuning that to with that turbo. It's maybe 380 to 400 sort of turbo, so 1.5 bar should do that if the fuel quality is good enough and if the engine's happy. Yeah, the ignition timing is the biggest difference between the Japanese maps and the UK or the US maps, because the fuel quality is so much better. They can run like massive ignition timing, really aggressive ignition timing. And when you're looking at the ROMs, they tend to load it all into the advanced map. So from a Subaru point of view, there's always two maps, or at least two maps. It has a base ignition timing, and then there's an ignition advance, which, depending on what the advanced multiplier or the DAM or IAM, depending on what you call it, it's like a happiness scale, engine happiness scale. So it goes from 0 to 1 on a 32-bit ECU car, or from 0 to 16. If it's at 1 on a 32-bit car, then the engine's happy, generally. If it's at 16 on an older ECU, then the engine's happy. If that drops down to, let's say, 0.5 on a newer car, then it's only adding half of the extra ignition advance in that extra table. But I would never want to rely on that to keep it safe. You always, if you're tuning it, tune it so that it's not detting at all for the fuel that you use, and then drop it back a little bit extra for safety, and then, you know, it's happy then. But obviously using det cans to see whether it's, or to listen for whether it is actually detonating rather than whether the ECU is picking it up, because it doesn't pick it up as often as it ought to. Making a set of det cans £20, $20 or whatever, $30 at tops. But if it saves an engine, it is well worth it. Well worth it. I wouldn't tune without them. I know I see mappers over in the States in particular where they don't use them at all, and it scares the crap out of me. And I find it amazing that customers will go there and get the cars mapped and accept engine failures as just a run for the course. It shouldn't be sort of par for the course for Subaru Tuning. You know, it rarely happens on the dyno here. Right, any other questions on that? I don't know whether you saw the map and a JDM impressor, whether it was needed video, but I'd recommend watching that because I go into the differences in the maps and sort of go through the changes that I make. It would be very similar changes to what you would need to make on yours, but I would drop the ignition timing down even lower just to give it more safety on the 91. Right. Yeah, hi. Can't get ECU Edit to read my 04 Forester XT Turbo. Should I look for special XMLs? If so, can you share yours on Discord? All my XML that I use is on Discord, and any ones that I create or any extra tables that I discover or find or reveal in the XML, I post those in there as well. So that's for Academy members. So, you know, not like Race Dynamics supporters, but Academy member level upwards. So that's all in the Discord group. It could be that you're not using the right sort of vehicle selection as to why it's not reading it. It can be sometimes fussy as well. You know, I've had occasions, particularly on Foresters, where, you know, it should be a particular type of vehicle setup, but because it's a Forester, it's a parts bin car, and they've used a different setup, different ECU. A lot of the time, I'll test it on ECU Flash and see whether I can download on ECU Flash, and then, you know, work out whether there is a variation there. But I've never not been able to read anything out of a car that is on ECU Edit, using the version of ECU Edit that I run. Apart from if the vehicle's been mapped on Cobb or on Ecotec, or for the later cars, Ecotec with a race ROM, in which case I've just recently been getting into those with fast ECU, which will then sort of access those. Right, hi Tommy. Doing a coil update to more modern coils. Current setup appears to be 2 triggers, 5 wires to each trigger. Have you ever seen? Yeah, that would be a wasted spark setup. But what's the vehicle, Tommy? Right, so they told you the exhaust was the restriction. I would really doubt that. As a 3-inch exhaust all the way through, that's not going to be a restriction even at 600 horsepower, let alone 300, unless there is a cat in there, or unless there's a really nasty 90-degree bend, sharp restriction, or a bit of a baffle has come down and is blocking the exhaust. But you can hear that when you're driving it. It just sounds like you're blowing through a straw rather than an actual exhaust. So it just sounds like there's a restriction there. If you're not hearing that, or if they can't hear it, then there really isn't a restriction there. If the boost level was decent, like on that turbo, on a GT30, you're probably talking 1.7, 1.8 bar. That'll hold, maybe even push it a little bit beyond that. But on a 2.5, probably 1.7, 1.8 is perfect. But that's way more than 282, or it should be, unless they're running zero ignition timing, or you've got really, really bad fuel in there, or you've got one injector that is flowing slightly less than the others, in which case it's detting on that cylinder, so they're having to take out, or they are taking out ignition across the board rather than just on one cylinder, or it just sounds like there's something not going right in there, and they're blaming an exhaust, where I would find that unusual. Right, so it's an 05 WRX or STI, in which case there will be like 4 trigger wires coming out of the ECU for the coils. There's 12 volt feed to each coil, and a ground to each coil. The trigger wires will just send a voltage via that trigger to the coil to actually get it to ignite. I don't quite understand what's going on. Tommy, if you want to email me setup and pictures and all the rest of it, I might be able to explain it or point you in the right direction. Zed is absolutely right. It could be bad headers on Owen's car. If you got like those horrific Toyo Sport headers that I dissected on the video, then they can restrict the power massively, massively, even beyond what the standard headers do, which are actually really good. But the Toyo Sport ones, they've never seen any kind of testing of flow because they're horrific. So yes, it could be those. Okay. Is there tuning for the GD transmissions, the auto and the manual? The auto, there are things that you can do to speed up the gear change, but most of those are hardware related, so you can buy different parts to actually go into the gearbox that will speed up the gear change on it. The manual, no, there's nothing you can do ECU wise to tune the transmission. The ECU controls the engine and the fueling, the ignition, the cam timing, all those bits, but doesn't touch the gearbox at all. There's just a translation from the engine speed versus the road speed for a gear. and depending on what year of car, as to whether it displays it on the dash or whether it displays it in the software. Yeah, or send me it on Discord, Tommy. Do a private message on Discord, and I'll sort of get the information and sort of come back to you. But yeah, it does sound weird what you've got there, but yeah, if it's an 05 WRX or STI, it's not going to be wasted spark. It would be entirely different. There's lots of things in the issue. The XML that people have developed over the years, mostly in the open source community, that translates the hexadecimal file, the ROM file, into tables that you can read. You know, most of the time they're built up from educated guesses, but there is a vast amount of tables in there that could be used to fine-tune things, but the majority of the things are fueling, ignition, boost, rev limits, speed limits, overrun fueling, cam timing, all those bits. They're all disclosed. Check engine lights, you can switch them on and off, but there's other things in there, and most of the time you could spend hours, weeks, days, months trying to find a particular table, but you know, over the 20 years I've very, very, very rarely had to do that. The Discord, if you join as an Academy member or above, there should be a join button underneath any of my videos. And you know, there's a whole range of extra videos. There's Discord group like that. Like the link to sign up for that would be shown on the community page, but that's only shown if you're at that level. And then there's you know, there are so many guys on there that are tuning their own Subarus, that are passionate about it, and that help each other, and you know, I help, and you know, it's a good growing community there, so that we're all, you know, passionate about Subarus and tuning them and making them work right. Um, 5-minute drive, keeping it under 3,000 be still classed as cold. Yeah, maybe it would be. Yeah, I think that would. Do you know if the Jap speed headers are bad? I fitted this out a few years back because the original exhaust heat shields are falling apart. Now you're worried. I'm trying to think what the Jap speed ones look like. If you look at that video that I did, I think it was 10 mods to avoid, something along those lines, where you've got the 4 branches of the manifold going into a collector, which is really tiny, and then got a little restrictor in there as well, and then immediately goes around a 90-degree bend. If it looks anything like those, bin it and just put the standard ones back on, give them a little port in. But if it doesn't look like those, and the actual collector is around the corner, if that makes sense, then they should be okay. They're not going to be the best quality in the world. They're not going to be the same as GT spec headers or RCM headers or Tomei headers or whoever else makes decent headers. But you do kind of get what you pay for on the header side of things. You know, if you're wanting to change to aftermarket ones, the standard ones are brilliant, up to about 400. With a bit of porting, they'll go way beyond that. thank you so much for your amazing content. It's my pleasure. I love what I do. I'm very lucky to do this for a living. You know, I tune Subarus every day, or almost every day of the week. Tomorrow I'm not tuning Subarus, I'm building a Subaru engine, or stripping down an engine tomorrow. But yeah, I love what I do. I'm very lucky. I know you've done something on this before, but is there a way to add launch control to 2009 WRX without having to use a patched ROM? You can with the likes of Dime Mod on those, but it's quite a lot more complicated than just adding it on. I'm not sure whether the CH mod have the patches for the 2009. Be worth looking on there. I'm trying to think of the name of them, but I'm sure it was CH mod. And you know, there's like downloadable patch files that you can actually just add launch control or just add flat foot shifting and those sort of things. Yeah, agreed, Ryan. Hi, mate. Yeah, the up pipes are shit. The material that the Jap Speed ones are made of is cheap stainless, if it is stainless, but a really poor quality and quite thin, so they crack really easily. Ported would be great. Get the heads ported while you're at it. Yeah, if you're doing the head porting, then you know it's a whole different ball game. You know, it's engine out and heads off and all the rest of it. I've not seen the need to do that unless you're going above 600 horsepower. Below that, the standard exhaust ports are absolutely fine. Okay, how are we doing time wise? Generally with these sessions they are up to an hour, but if I run out of questions I will finish the session because there's no point me being here talking to myself. Well, I could be doing something else, like chilling out on a sofa, having a glass of wine with my wife or whatever. Yeah, always avoid the up pipes with the flexi joints on them. To me, it's just laziness. They haven't bothered to jig them properly, and you know they're just trying to make up for the fact that they don't line up properly by putting a flexi joint in there. The flexis are poor quality and they collapse, and the internal fibres of those can get drawn up into the turbo, and you know you're into a world of pain there. Right, is there any reason to upgrade the airbox? Right, with most of the Subaru parts, Subaru are really, really good at designing things. Like the airboxes are brilliant, the intercoolers are brilliant, the engines, the cranks, the gearboxes. But as with all of them, they are up to a point. And with most things like the intercooler and the exhaust and what have you, and the airbox the same, beyond a certain point, it will start restricting the power. With the standard airbox compared to an induction kit, that's around 350 horsepower that it will start to sort of reduce the power. So at 350, swapping from an airbox to an induction kit, probably not going to gain you any horsepower. But at 370, you might gain 5 horsepower from putting an induction kit on there, or maybe 10. 400, you're going to start getting some quite substantial restrictions from the airbox. So if you're less than 350 horsepower, if it's a standard JDM STI, which it will be, then I don't think you're going to gain anything from putting an induction kit on there. Right, well, I haven't done a back-to-back test on the same car, on the same dyno, on the same day. So I do not believe there is a big difference between the headers being equal length or unequal length from a performance point of view. The difference comes from the turbo that's on the end of the headers. So a twin scroll turbo on unequal length headers is going to totally outperform a single scroll turbo on unequal length headers, because they spool up quicker. They're a more efficient turbo, but it's not going to have more as far as power, but you have a bigger area under the curve, and it's the area under the curve that dictates how well or how quick the car feels. If you wanted to go to a twin scroll setup, then the JDM setup, like with a VF37 or VF36 on the twin scroll headers, is absolutely epic for the road. It's amazing to drive. It just spools up and you've got power right the way. I was doing a JDM STI, I think that was yesterday, and with an 8,500 rev limit, it just, like, you've got 300 plus horsepower from 3,000 right the way up. It's a really quick car. Yeah, I think the thing that you find with putting induction kits in there is it then starts sucking in hot air from the engine bay. So if you're doing lots of stop-start driving at traffic lights through town, then you can get a lot of heat soak in there. Whereas the airbox and the scoop that comes up and grabs the air from the front of the car does work really well, and it does, like, bring fresh air in there, which can make it more responsive, which is why Subaru developed this over the years, and Subaru are pretty clever. Am I right to think the STI was built with modifications in mind and the WRX is more of a commute car? Hear about the WRX engines being weaker and the STI allowing more power with mods. Not all STI engines and not all WRX engines. Like the 2.5 STI engine, like the 255 and the 257, there's not a lot strength-wise between the two of them. Hawkeye WRX engine-wise is very, very similar to a Hawkeye STI engine-wise. It's a 255 compared to a 257, but the weak point is the pistons on both of them, and you won't make much more power on the STI than you will on the WRX before things start breaking. So the STI's got better bits on it. It's got a stronger gearbox, better brakes, better suspension, better interior. But the WRX was just a cheaper version, and with a 5-speed box, it is sometimes quicker to 60 than an STI, because you've got an extra gear change on the STI. But the WRX is a great car, really great car, and it can be really good fun. Tune one today that was came in with 230, went out with 275, completely standard car, and it's a transformation as far as the torque. In the mid-range, you're talking 60-70 pounds a foot torque extra in the mid-range, where you're really going to feel it. you know, 40 horsepower at the top, you're not really going to feel as much as the torque differences. Yeah, the cold air intakes where it's coming down into the bumper area or behind the fog light cover or fog light blank, they can be really good, but in wetter climates like in the UK, I wouldn't recommend it. It's, you know, driving in the rain or through puddles, it's just going to suck up a load of water into the engine, and that does not compress very well. It doesn't do the engine very much good at all. Right, how are we doing for questions? We're probably at the end of the questions. Right, well, I'll assume that the questions are paused for the moment because there's always a time delay between you typing something out and it firing its way through the internet to my screen. If there isn't any more questions, then I'll just close the session now, and that's fabulous. So thank you very much for joining me, asking questions, and I'll see you next week. Cheers.